Okay, welcome everyone to the latest AWS User Group South Wales. So this month we're celebrating International Women's Day. So it's a big cause for celebration, a great opportunity to celebrate sort of gender equality. So I'm super excited to be joined by so many incredible builders and engineers and product managers. I can't wait to hear them tell their story. So in terms of format, we're going to let them tell the story individually, then bring everyone together into a panel at the end. And that's where you'll be able to ask questions. So as we go along, keep on dropping questions into the comments, and then we'll have a panel session at the end. First off, though, I'd like to hand over to Jim, who's from our sponsor, Mobilize. They've been our sponsor since day one of the user group. So, Jim.
Hello, everybody. I'm not going to be talking today, just a little intro from me. As with many of these user groups that we've done virtually, unfortunately, we're not back in person yet, so I can't give everybody free pizza and beer, which is the usual drill. So in order to support the user groups, we've been giving away vouchers, AWS certification vouchers. So I've got a couple to give away. So if you are looking, if you're training at the moment and looking to do an AWS cert, if you can drop your details, send me a note to vouchers@mobilize.cloud. We'll pick out 2 people at random and give you some certs. Just to let you know, that information that you do provide, we abide to GDPR, so it'll only be used for the purposes of administering vouchers. Nobody's going to try and sell you anything. So please feel free to enter your details, and hopefully we'll be giving away some vouchers after the event. Thank you very much. Enjoy yourselves. Cheers.
Perfect. Thanks, Jim. So we're going to start off handing over to Christy. I know that, not trying to embarrass or anything, but obviously it was the when we did the write-up, we put you down as a senior software engineer at Liberty Mutual. Understanding is that that's no longer the case, and you got a promotion, so a huge congratulations on that. And so yeah, over to Christy.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, so as Matt mentioned, I'm now a principal software engineer at Liberty Mutual Insurance. I work specifically on our serverless enablement DevOps team, just kind of helping support the 5,000 or so tech employees across the enterprise embrace the serverless first initiative. So I've really been loving that. I've been at Liberty Mutual for about 5 years now, but my tech story really started kind of, 10 years ago now, which seems like a lifetime ago. But back when I was in high school, I kind of was trying to figure out what I wanted to go to college for, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I had settled on being an architect, like building buildings, went to like a program for it, decided I hated it and it was way too creative and like artsy for me. So I kind of fell back on some technology. I had the opportunity of trying out some engineering classes with my high school, went to a computer science class virtually, like kind of completely on my own in high school. And really just kind of fell in love with tech and programming. But I liked both the hands-on and the programming aspect. So I ended up applying for colleges that were in computer engineering. So I ended up at Roger Williams University, which is a very tiny liberal arts college in Rhode Island. Really loved it. It was a perfect mix of kind of this well-roundedness and liberal arts, as well as really heavy in the tech space too. So I had the kind of fortunate ability to have really small class sizes and a lot of other women in my program, which is a stark contrast to, I think, a lot of folks' experiences these days. So I really consider myself pretty lucky to have that support system. Was very involved with Society of Women Engineers, Women in Tech, a lot of different women in computing groups in college. And then from there, I kind of met Liberty Mutual at a conference, ended up interning for them. And then I, since then, accepted a full-time position, and I've been here for the last 5 years or so, kind of been jumping around to a couple different things, started doing some Java and microservices work, did some full stack work, and then kind of just stumbled into AWS and the cloud. which was really cool. Had the opportunity to work with CloudFormation templates, and then built on that to be pretty active in the CDK and SAM space now. So throughout all of that, I've been kind of really involved with women in tech. We have a women in tech group that I do a lot of work with. Specifically, we have a work stream called LEGIT, which is an acronym for Liberty Encouraging Girls in Technology, where I help out with giving girls exposure in the K through 12 range and some of the college level in STEM fields. And I've been really enjoying that. We've been working at our code workshops and working one-on-one with students, working with the community. So currently I've been working on our external communications and branding in that space. I've also done a ton of women in tech mentorship. I usually am mentoring about, at least 6 people at a time, it seems like these days, which I've been loving, and doing a lot with groups like Hack Diversity, and working with our Women in Tech Summit. So I've definitely been really involved in this space for quite a while, and recently actually put out a blog post on how to support women in tech that was picked up by Business Insider, and has been gaining quite a bit of traction, way more than I ever expected to. So this is definitely a space that I'm very passionate about. Absolutely love working in serverless, and also recently completed a master's degree while working full time in electrical and computer engineering, where I focused on IoT, cloud computing, data analytics, and some serverless work. So I'm definitely really ingrained in the tech space, really ingrained in the women in tech space, and I love to talk about it. So happy to be here and excited to be on the panel with everyone else.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So next, if it's okay, we're going to hand over to Eleanor. Is that okay, Eleanor?
Yeah, that's great. So I am a tech lead at the moment at the UK's Office for National Statistics. I've been in that role for a couple of years, and basically throughout my career, I've been focused on kind of government services through the use of technology. But how I got my first job in tech was pretty much by chance. After university, I couldn't get a job. I put my CV on a bunch of different job websites. I was applying for things and never hearing back. And eventually I was contacted by a recruiter off the back of one of those job listing agencies. And that recruiter was hiring for a graduate IT consultancy company. And I didn't even really know what that meant. But basically, they explained to me that they would offer me 3 months of training in their software academy. At the end of that, they'd place me with one of their clients in a graduate consultant role. And it sounded like a dream come true to me. They're telling me they're going to train me to do a job and in an industry that I'd already kind of written myself out of. I'd thought about applying to university for computer science and decided that I'd never make it. So I'd written myself out of that already, and they offered me a chance to do that. It was also the only job that I had coming my way. I really couldn't get any other jobs. So I absolutely took that opportunity and ran with it. But I do want to highlight that, like, in retrospect, there are some issues with these kinds of graduate academies, and I don't think they necessarily always present our industry in the best light, because there can be quite a lot of privilege that goes into being able to attend an academy. And while I'm really grateful that I was able to do that, I just want to kind of, be aware of the privilege that came with that, and also highlight that just because that avenue might not be the most inclusive way in, there are so many other more inclusive ways into the industry, and there are so many teams that are committed to working in that way, that there really is a path for you. And once I started my placement, my first role was at Companies House as a graduate developer. And I think the biggest thing I learned there was just like how to learn as an engineer, right? And the fact that we're all going to be constantly learning throughout our careers. That's something we've all got to make ourselves comfortable with really early on, because technology is always going to change. The things we need to know to do our jobs always going to change. And it's one of the things I find great about the job, but it's worth going into it with your eyes open because it can be quite tiring at times. And the other really great thing I found working at Companies House early on was that the diversity of the experience of the people around me in terms of how they all learned and how they were all willing to share their different experiences of how they'd learned technology, especially with them mostly not coming from traditional tech backgrounds, as someone who was also not coming from a degree, was really helpful to me. People had to learn, at the time we were working in Perl, people had to learn Perl for themselves, and they were able to share with me the resources that worked best for them. I definitely found that like during that first job, I gained so much confidence from working with my colleagues, but there was an element of that where it was also eye-opening to work in an industry that is traditionally male dominated and see kind of what misconceptions I might have about that and how that might affect the way that I was being treated at work. And initially, like I was just completely blind to it. And I was going out of my way to be involved in things. I was asking questions and raising issues anywhere I could. You know, how can we improve this process? How can we work better as a team? And I found that sometimes my managers would kind of react in a weird way to that. It's like, why are you raising questions? Why are you raising issues? You shouldn't be doing that. And then other managers would be super receptive to it. And conversations with my peers helped me understand the role that like unconscious bias plays in a lot of those conversations. And especially I noticed very early on, as the only woman in my Scrum team, in the team I was working in, more often than not, I was the one being asked to plan the meetings, and I was the one being asked to initiate conversations with other teams. And I started learning to challenge that really early on. And in challenging that, it definitely didn't always ingratiate me to my managers, but also made me really aware of like that need to occasionally stand up for myself or push back against those things and kind of find the environment where I was really going to thrive and where I was going to be able to put my inquisitive nature to the best use. And I think calling out that kind of bias, learning that early on, has really helped me in my career, especially now that I'm in more of a leadership position. It's something I do often with teams as a way of getting a good understanding of how receptive they are to change. How willing someone is to engage in feedback about their behavior can be really telling about how willing they are to engage in feedback about their technical design or how they're going to build a new piece of software. So, you know, these skills all kind of mix together into how we're going to have to interact with each other. The other thing I found early on in my career when I started looking for my second job was how scary the job market is. And it's something that I've made kind of a focus of mine over the years, understanding what it is that's wrong with the way hiring is happening in our industry right now and why it feels so kind of scary and inaccessible for a lot of people. And mostly what it comes down to is that most companies are actively excluding a lot of people from applying simply by not thinking about their choice of language or kind of how they're phrasing things. There's so much work that can be done in that space, and it's something I've started giving talks about in the last couple of years. Space I'm really passionate in is how we can make hiring as inclusive as possible. What it comes down to is we need to break the rules when we apply for jobs, because everyone else applying for the jobs is also breaking the rules. And while that sounds like a little bit scary and a bit radical, I've found that every opportunity I've had in my career has basically come from being told no, and that my personality doesn't particularly like being told no, and I like to try and prove people wrong when that happens. So like I left my first job because I was denied a promotion I felt I'd earned. I was nearly fired from my second job for not having the right skills, and I turned that round into demonstrating that my skills were just elsewhere, and ended up having a team stood up within a couple of months that, you know, my focus was leading that team and developing new standards around observability. And leading into that kind of observability technical monitoring space helped me land my next job. So always trying to push back against those expectations and see what I could do next in the face of people who didn't think I could do that was really kind of a catalyst for a lot of the movement in my career. I ultimately became a tech lead because the company I was working for at the time didn't want to bid on a project. And I said, can you just give me the weekend? I'm going to write the proposal for this project. And if you think the proposal is a strong enough representation of our offering, then you'll put the proposal in, right? And my senior managers went, it's a fair trade. You're not asking us to do any work other than read something. Okay, if you really want to do it, go ahead and write the proposal. And I wrote the proposal, and in the proposal, I listed myself as the tech lead, despite only being like a mid-level developer at the time. And the company ended up winning that bid, and I got myself a tech lead role just by putting my name on a form and saying, I really want to do this. So I just think the other really important thing I've learned in the last couple of years is around knowing your own worth and not letting the no's sink in and damage your confidence, but looking at them as the opportunity and that catalyst to prove someone wrong or do something more. And I think it's worked out quite well for me. But I know that that's the kind of like environment that motivates me, is kind of being able to face up to that challenge. But right now, I'd say that my job at ONS is really playing to my strengths. So I'm really invested in open data and how we can make the data that government holds more accessible to citizens. We're working right now on the ONS website around making census data available in more accessible and relatable ways than we've ever published data before. Everything that we're doing is written in Go, which is my preferred programming language, and I run the Go community in South Wales. I've set up a Cardiff Go meetup. And also everything we're doing in my job relates to developing APIs to make that data open. And I'm involved in a lot of cross-government communities around APIs and open data and everything like that. So being really kind of community focused within the tech spaces that I'm passionate about is a big part of what I do. And making sure that in each of those communities, we're considering inclusivity every step of the way is a real passion of mine. So from like discouraging gatekeeping at a community level, and also highlighting the importance of empathy in how we're designing new software. One of the best ways I've found to like level the playing field for myself is to not let the men around me hide from the fact that they're starting from a position of privilege. So be that challenging their behavior or being aware of my own privilege and highlighting that in public. So I know that not everyone will be able to push back against things in the way that I have. And raising that as an issue within a community that might not realize some of those biases can often help create a more receptive atmosphere for others who also need to be heard. So that's kind of where I'm at. It's all about open data and inclusivity, essentially, in my world. But yeah, I'm happy to be here and answer any questions with the panel later on. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Stuart. And we did have a comment came in. It was a comment more than a question, but from one of the viewers, saying that they also feel and face a lot of bias, a lot of it probably unconscious rather than deliberate, but it doesn't make it easier. So they were thanking you for the information there. That's great to read. So next up, I'd like to hand over to Farah.
Okay. All right. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Well, my name is Farah Campbell, and I am a Senior Product Marketing Manager for Modern Applications at AWS, and I'm super excited to be here. So thank you very much, Matt, for inviting me. So my story is a little bit different. I got into tech. Let's say I was never really interested in computers when I was, in high school or anything. And it wasn't actually until my mom got remarried and my stepdad owned a technology company. And I remember like working at it or going to his office, and the different engineers would be doing different things. And I was always very curious about what they were doing. And one of the guys there, he actually worked for this bank. And so he was always joining these hack rooms to understand where the different infiltrations would come from. And so then I was trying to understand, like, do you actually hack into things, and how does that actually happen? And then if so, how can you teach me how to do that? That actually I worked there for about a year. Never really fell into programming. But later when I moved to Portland, I wanted to get a new job, and I had been in healthcare for some time, and there was this vibrant startup community here in Portland, Oregon, and I really wanted to figure out a way to get involved. And so I started putting my applications in and trying to highlight, things that I had done that maybe would be equal to the job requirements for these new tech roles. And I applied for about a year and didn't get a single hit. I didn't get a return email or anything. And so I figured I needed to try to figure out a different way. So there was a technology conference called TechFest Northwest that I offered to volunteer at. And through that, I met a number of different people, a lot of great conversations. And in fact, my job was managing the green room, and so I hung out with the speakers. I know that was a hard part, but I got to meet Kara Swisher, and she asked me to give her a ride back to the airport. And when I was doing so, we're kind of talking about. She was asking me questions about what I did, and she noticed that I had this love for the tech industry, and she kept asking me why didn't I try to get more involved. And I told her that it'd been really hard to get in. From that, she sent me the Steve Jobs commencement address, about doing something that you love. And the next day, I was offered a role, but this was part-time, and I needed full-time work. I'm a single mom of 2 kids, and but I couldn't stop thinking about what she said. And so I ended up quitting my full-time job to take a part-time role at a startup called RipFog as an office manager, knowing that I'm pretty good at, finding problems to solve. And, very quickly I was able to do that and figure out ways that I could help the team to, work more efficiently, made sure that, I was helping them with expenses and all kinds of different things. I was interrupting meetings, asking who Jason and Cassandra were because I didn't know who they were talking about. I actually thought they were talking about a person and not the tech. But from that, I remember one day I told them that I wanted to, that I was going to help them update our webpage as we were going to go live, and I was going to take care of our legal terms and services. And I remember when I first tried to copy and paste that from the Google Doc, and all the formatting was wrong, and I'm trying to figure out why in the world I can't make this work. And then I Googled it and realized that I was going to need to write a little bit of, I think it's HTML, in order to make all of that work. And so I actually figured it out line by line. I had to stay up all night in order to do so. But I do know that the day that I walked in that morning, nobody expected me to have figured that out, but I did. And I was incredibly proud of myself. And from that, by that time, I had gone full time. And I started getting them to let me help them join their bug bashes. And I actually ended up becoming like the bug master because I would find tons of them. And I think a lot of it was just clicking on a number of different things at the wrong times, maybe. They let me update our legal terms or our docs page. They, wrote, they gave me like a wiki doc that I could follow along and exactly how to do that. So that helped me to, feel more helpful. That company was actually acquired, and I was not taken. Mostly only the engineers were, but I was offered through that. A fellow that I'd met through that startup, director of operations now at a different startup. And from there, that was also a great role, but I wouldn't say I actually loved that role, but I really did love working with the engineers. And so I'd always try to figure out ways I could work with them on their projects. And by around, about a year, I was offered a role back with somebody that was at the first startup I was at, and now, doing the same type of role. But this way I would get to help build out the team. So I was the first to hire when they raised their first seed round, and really, just to kind of come in and help manage the team. And I will never forget just, at all these different offices, how comfortable and how at home I felt, working with some of these teams, and how it just kind of felt okay to be yourself. And everybody was trying to figure out ways to solve different problems. And it was really just amazing to me to see all these things come together, although I could never quite figure it out. So at Reflect, I also got them to let me update different web pages. So I would actually have commits into our production database, which always helped me to feel cool and kind of like part of the team. But I would say my first real, I guess the intro to the cloud would have been at Stackry. And now this is Reflect got acquired as well by Puppet. Again, I didn't get taken because I was not an engineer. but I found a great role, and now I am managing the relationship between AWS and a company called Stackery. And Stackery was a serverless development company. It basically had this visual editor, so you could drag and drop all these different AWS resources, and then it would configure all the YAML for you and drop it out into CloudFormation, or now SAM. That was actually very interesting to me, because I wondered if maybe if I could figure out what exactly I needed, if I would actually be able to do something. I was able to do something. I figured out how to create a webhook that would read my emails, and it would drop actually names and emails and what department they were in, and all the different AWS folks I was contacting with, that helped me to basically create this huge organizational spreadsheet. And I'll never forget when I actually made that work and how awesome that actually felt. And I didn't really realize how hard the work that I was doing was. But, learning how to authenticate with Google, I then had to, figure out all these different things that I had to update, because I was using whole templates that had new versions, or just different parts of them that need to be updated. And I think that whole process probably took me about a month, and probably about, 10 hours of sleepless nights and trying to throw my computer. But one of the things I realized is that, learning the language, and if I could figure out how to Google these errors, then I would be able to figure out how I could program better. But that really was the first time was actually able to build something. And so then I wanted to build something new, and I worked with one of my coworkers. And at Stackery, I was really lucky. Half of our engineering team at this startup was women. So we would all get together on Fridays, and, they would teach me Git, which then became part of the hardest part for me to understand, along with, best practices. And I was able to build this language translator app, which again was shocking to me. All this to say, this is, I worked very hard to get where I was at. But I think, networking and meeting with folks and trying to find like-minded folks that, you can meet with and engage with and get introductions to different companies to, or get mentorship. I probably have had 10 to 12 different types of mentors along the way, and I never would have been able to do any of these things without them. Along with I still connect with all of the different engineers that have worked the different startups that I've been at to this day, and they are definitely who I go to first when I want to get questions answered. I would say another thing for me that's been very, very effective is also being an advocate for myself. I really agree with what Eleanor said, is, pointing out these biases that people don't realize that they're even doing. I will never forget the day that, because I was a director of operations, all offers came through my desk, and I was the one that sent them out. And we had a junior developer that was coming in with a salary higher than mine. And I just was shocked, because, here I was, the first person hired, been there for a year, built the entire team, and I just didn't feel valued at all. And I don't think it was on purpose. I just don't think they thought about it at all. And I actually stormed into a meeting and basically called the team out, the CEO out, and told him I was going to quit unless I just said I was going to quit, and please don't contact me. I then did a bunch of research and figured out what I should be making. The next day I went in, and I did get a raise. So being an advocate for yourself, having to close that gap for yourself is very, very important. Establishing trust with folks that you can, that help to back you up and that will stand in line with you. I actually told this story in the Chasing Grace documentary, about women finding grace while working in tech. And I talked to my team before I told the story, and each one of them thought I should tell it. And at the premiere of the event, I think half that team showed up to stand by me, which I know was very hard for them. So there is avenues to get into this, into this space. There's lots of ways to get started. There's lots of help out there. keep joining these user groups, find folks that are active, reach out to Matt, have him connect you with folks that he knows. He knows a lot of AWS heroes that are, happy to help, that are providing tons of content on how to get started. And that's exactly what I did is, I found a blog post and a documentation or GitHub repo that I could copy and work off of, and just started from there. And it's kind of amazing to me that I was able to figure it out. And here I am now at AWS, working with some of the smartest people in the world, and still feeling a crazy amount of imposter syndrome. But I'm here, and I think serverless is a great place to get started. There's a lot going on right now. I think it's a very inclusive place to be. You see a lot of ideas, a lot of sharing, how to get started, what's the best, what are the best services to use for, different types of architectures. And there's not a one size fits all for this. And so, there's a lot of information sharing. Anyhow, thanks so much for listening. And I'm happy to answer any questions with all the other amazing women on this panel.
Cheers. Thank you so much, Farah. And again, there's another great comment that came in. Saying that it's very inspiring, they can relate. Sometimes they feel they take longer than anyone else to figure out things, and very hard on themselves, getting to appreciate how far I came. But there was actually a question then that came in, which was, did you lose faith in yourself at any time on this path?
Oh, all the time, like almost every night. Literally, I remember just going to bed crying because I couldn't figure it out. And then the next day I'd wake up, take some time away, get up, and I realized it was like a tab. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. Why is this happening? Or why didn't I see that I had that comma there that's messing this whole thing up? But definitely I lost faith. But the thing is that I don't know. I don't like to people knew I was doing it. And so I didn't want anybody to know. So I wanted to at least finish it, at least for myself. My kids knew I was doing it. And so, it was important to me to try to follow it all the way through. And at the end of the day, I had a lot of help to fall back on, a lot of people that were happy to answer questions to help to get me on the right path.
Awesome. Thank you very much for telling your story there, Farah. So now I'd like to bring up Sharon. So Sharon Mitchell.
Hello. Hi, guys. So I'd actually been working in bookkeeping and accountancy for 8 years before I made the switch to tech back in 2000. And the crazy thing is, I realized that was 22 years ago. My journey started with, I actually read for a computer science degree as a mature student. So I graduated in 2003 because it's standard 3-year course, and went straight to work as a graduate developer, literally the Monday after my final exam. So no summer off for me. I don't know if anyone remembers, you're probably not of the same vintage as me, but this was the era when the web was just taking off. And there was great demand for PHP and MySQL driven websites and shopping carts. So I've been sensible in spending the summer of my second year teaching myself PHP, JavaScript, MySQL. And I did that through developing a personal project, which in my opinion is the best way to learn, is to have a project, have a driver, a reason behind why you're learning it. Because then you're more likely to scurry off and do it whenever you've got half an hour, 45 minutes. It was a wish list. It was mywishlist.org. So it was similar in functionality, what you get today on the Amazon wish list. So you could sign up for an account, add descriptions and images of things you'd like to receive as gifts, and share those lists with friends and families. In the spring of 2005, I became self-employed. I set up my own consultancy. But by the fall of 2006, I'd actually become mum to an autistic daughter, and my husband had had his leg amputated. So there was no going back to work for me just yet because I was needed at home. But during that absence from the workforce, and when my own children were in school, I became a STEM ambassador because I'm passionate about, each one teach one. So I set up code clubs in primary schools. So I was teaching sort of 9 to 13-year-olds how to code in Python, Scratch, HTML. I then went on to develop an unhealthy interest in microcontrollers and IoT devices. So I developed quite the portfolio of interesting sort of proof of concept pieces, usually involving geolocation, mapping, weather API consumption, that kind of thing. This was basically just to sort of keep my brain active whilst I wasn't actually working for an employer. One thing I'm particularly proud of, I actually won a competition, and I got this little microcontroller device. I think it was run by Instructables.com, and you had to submit a project brief of what you'd do with the device if you won this. It's a MediaTek Linkit 1 kit, if I remember rightly, and they had 200 of them, and it was a global competition, and you had to submit a proposal. And to my surprise, they sent me one. So I was then kind of obliged to actually implement the thing. So I made a geofence with SMS alerting. So something that could be retrofitted to luggage or pets or a favorite toy. So if it got lost, you could locate it. But my heart sank when Vodafone launched their VBag and VPET products 3 years later. But that sometimes happens when you share projects online and maintain a GitHub and put them on these forums to show people. Sometimes, somebody takes your project and runs with it, but that's okay. So fast forwarding then to more recent years. So after spending 12 years as a full-time carer for my family, I always planned to go back to work. So in 2018, I went back to uni to do a 2-year part-time master's in advanced computer science, timing my graduation then, which was due in 2020, to coincide with my son going to primary school, because I thought that was probably the best time to do it, if anything. So yeah, in case anyone's wondering, my final big project for the master's was a microcontroller, and it had a 9DOF sensor in it and lots of hairy 3D spatial math, because I've never actually played with anything that used lots and lots of sensors. It was basically a novel wearable fall detector, but rather than the clunky ones that you see on the market that can sometimes get separated from their bearer, or they're embarrassing to wear, or whatever, it was a tiny little device that you could embed into clothing or footwear, because I thought that was quite novel. So that was an interesting project to get your head around, because I've never actually played with sort of 3D spatial maths to implement the algorithm to detect falls. So yeah, that same year that I graduated, 2020, by a stroke of luck, the DVLA actually launched an initiative to apprentice 10 junior cloud engineers and boot camp them through AWS certifications. And I was one of the 10 lucky people. And today I've got 4 AWS certifications under my belt thanks to it. I like to think that's karma for the Vodafone incident. So yeah, today I'm continuing my journey into the cloud space. I'm working as a DevOps engineer for version 1. I'm currently involved in a public sector cloud migration project. That's probably about all I can tell you. So yeah, happy to answer any questions. Oh, and one thing that Farah did say, I think, about the imposter syndrome, that never goes away.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Sharon. And a question did come in terms of, obviously a compliment in terms of it being impressive, the span of technology that you've worked with. But like I say, when you talk about setting things up yourself, was it scary to work for yourself and not having the stability and ease of working for a company?
Absolutely. Yes, definitely. But then I guess this all comes down to personal character, though. I mean, you're either the kind of person that embraces that, or you run away screaming from it. Lots of things are scary, but if you're up for it, or if you've got the tiniest little inkling that you might want to do it, go for it, I would say. Yes, it was scary, and it was kind of unfortunate timing as well, because I didn't have a job to go back to as such after my daughter was born. So that's how I ended up being sort of like a full-time carer and doing my little side projects just to keep my brain active. I think if I'd had that stability of an employer, I would have just gone back to work there, wouldn't I? So that none of this would have happened.
Awesome, thank you for that. So now I'd like to hand over to Pranita to tell her story.
Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. My name is Pranita Prakash. First of all, I'm so honored to be here as part of this group of amazing women. I'm a little bit intimidated myself. I work for AWS as a product manager, and I've been in this role for 6 months now. I used to be a developer. I was a developer the last 10 years of my life. So it's been a very interesting shift for me. It all started, I grew up in Bangalore, India, where there are probably more engineering schools than there are coffee shops. So every corner there's an engineering school. And my parents saw that I was good at logical reasoning, and they were like, you gotta get into computer science. And I was like, okay. I wasn't great at math, so if you ever needed proof that somebody can be good at tech without math skills, that's me. But it took me a while to fall in love. I think around the second year of my undergrad, I just made a program work, and it was so magical, and it just really connected for me. And I decided to get a master's degree, moved to the United States for it, I started off my tech journey at Juniper Networks, which is a networking device company, and I found that was way too hardcore, close to the operating system for me. So then I moved to Microsoft in Seattle, and I'm in Seattle right now. At Microsoft, I met, I feel like every woman I talk to in tech has this one mentor who's also a woman who gave them that confidence to do something really bold. And for me, that was my friend at Microsoft, who was like, I think I see leadership skills in you, and you should really consider product management. She told me that 6 years ago. So it took me a while to get here. I really enjoy writing code. I really enjoy programming. I did after at Microsoft, I had my first baby, and then right after that, I was like, I need to do something different. So I moved to Amazon, and I worked at Alexa for a bit, and then I worked at Lambda Core for a bit. I worked at DevTools for serverless, and which is where I'm still as a PM. I really enjoy the DevTools space. It feels like I'm doing good for the community of developers. And I'm now starting to take a more active role in mentoring, because I think because I have so many experiences and space to do that, and also interest to do that. One of the things that I've learned is, I came into tech thinking people who know everything, like in detail, in depth about a thing, are the ones who excel. But at AWS, I realized that that's not the case. It's the person who admits that they don't know everything and asks a lot of questions. That's the person that is going to excel in their team. And this mental shift for me was really helpful. It gave me a lot more confidence. I've been because I grew up in India, I came from a culture where you were expected to be seen and not heard. So a lot of my, my struggles have been trying to fight that cultural norm and speak up and be more confident and, I guess, ask more questions. And it's okay to not know things. I think Eleanor mentioned that you just got to put out what you want, and sometimes the universe like takes care of it for you. And that's kind of what I did with the product management role. After I had my second child in 2020, I decided that development was just starting to feel like more of the same. I knew I was good at it, but I knew that I wasn't going to be amazing developer, like a principal level or, so I just decided that I'm going to follow my mentor's advice and move to product management. And I'm really glad I did. I got great mentors to help me with the role change. I'm I'm happy to talk more on any of these experiences. I also am really passionate about helping immigrant women in the United States to, I guess, who face the same challenges as me, to help them excel in this field. It's really nice that you're all here. Thank you.
Cheers, thanks so much for that. Now there is a question that came in, which is why did it take a long time for you to try out project management, and do you prefer that now to coding?
I think it was because I wasn't trained in it. I got my master's degree in computer science, but I didn't do an MBA, and a lot of what I'm doing right now is learning at work. So I'm really not qualified for this job because I don't have the degrees for it. But honestly, it just goes to show how unimportant degrees are, and you learn so much of it on the job, and you can succeed even with just that.
Okay, and then there was another question which probably applies to Farah as well, which is like, I heard it's hard to get into companies like Microsoft and Amazon. Was it hard for you too?
Yeah, I don't think I got into either of them in the first interview, and that's okay, because there were times when I didn't like the team that I was interviewing with, and it's important not to get dejected when you get a refusal. And I had to learn it the hard way, because especially when I first joined or first started looking for jobs in tech, I saw a lot of rejections. And then you just improve over time. A lot of the interview skills are nothing to do with your coding knowledge. So it can be hard to get in.
Could you do a review on that as well, Farah?
So I think my experience was a little bit different. I had worked with AWS building, my job was to meet as many people at AWS as I could. And I think that, too, being a hero, you kind of get an elevated profile within the community. And actually I had a couple folks that, had talked to me about trying to go for a role at AWS. And I would talk to whoever the hiring manager was. And it wasn't that I wasn't interested. I just never had talked to somebody that made me feel like I could do it, I think. And so it wasn't until, it was Peter who left me and went to Mongo soon after I joined, but I'm not going to talk about that. But no, after him and I talked, we really, we kind of helped create a role for me there. But then, trying to go through the loop, I will say it definitely was hard. I will be honest with you, I watched a lot of videos. I did a lot of research on, what people were doing to interview. I probably spent 120 hours in total, writing out my answers to my questions. Any of the writing assignments that I had to do, I would reach out to people and ask them to review them. I actually had people that worked at AWS come over. I reached out and said, would you be willing to let me buy you dinner and let me practice, or like, is this what you're looking for? So I got a lot of feedback. So I was able to, make it the first round, but I will say it was very scary because, like, I know my CTO, one of literally the smartest person that I've ever met in my life, Chase, which is now at AWS. But like when he told me he didn't make it through, I thought there was no way. But I think I got lucky.
Cool. Is there anything that you'd add, Eleanor, in terms of hiring processes?
Yeah, I was just gonna. So, a decision I had to make for myself a couple of years ago was like whether I wanted to try and interview for company like those big mega tech companies, right? The amount of effort that you have to go through to go, like, it's just an unbelievable amount of time that is expected to be sunk into the possibility of a job with these companies. And I think for me, I just accepted that I wasn't willing to invest that much time like in working with those companies. It wasn't where I needed to go in my own journey. But it's also one of the things that's really helped me analyze good hiring practices in the industry. Because if you look at those roles, and the way you have to interview for those positions, the amount of effort that you're being asked to do, so like Farah, in like your personal context that you've described, that's such a higher burden on you than it might be on a single man with no caring responsibilities. And the industry is just set up in such a way to maybe bias against some of us being able to put that much effort into applying.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think for me, though, I think a lot of people said what I was doing was overkill. But I get, like, if I wouldn't have gotten the role after, basically working with the manager to create it, I think that, it was up to me to lose. And I wanted it so bad that, like, there was no way in the world I was going to let that happen. And I also had a lot of time on my hands. We were during COVID. And so there was a lot of days my kids are grown now. I live alone. I have my cat. So I had a lot of time on my hands when I couldn't hang out with anybody. So I guess I invested it in myself.
Yeah, I totally agree on how unfair it is that we have to learn building graph algorithms for an interview that we never end up using. And it's more unfair on moms, right? As I can't imagine putting aside any time after work to prepare for an interview right now. And you're preparing for things that you'll not possibly use in your workplace, and your challenges are more around working with a team and how to deal with people and how to get the information you need to build something. So our interview process definitely needs an overhaul.
Yeah, I mean, when I was a single mom, it would definitely been tough. I would not have had the time to invest, and that's I think why I've been able to do that now. But there's definitely a problem. I mean, I'll be honest, at one of the startups I worked at, in the middle of it, we were trying to hire somebody, and here I am speaking at these women in tech events all the time and talking about how great our office is, but yet I can't get them to hire another woman for whatever reason. And it literally got to the point where I told him, if the next person, I can't, I want to be involved in every single interview. Let me know what you're looking for. And we were able to turn that around, but it does take, being forceful because it needs to be a priority.
This example comes to mind. I was still nursing when I interviewed for Amazon, and they used to have a full day loop of 5 interviews back to back, with lunch as well was an interview. And I had no time to go to the mother's room to pump, and it was excruciating by the end of the day. And then I wrote an email to the recruiter that, I mentioned that this was my condition, but you did not take that into account and give me a break of 30 to 30 minutes, right? So hopefully, there are a lot of things that don't take women into account, and our unique challenges that we have. And it can be disheartening, but then you just have to, I think, keep making noise and bringing it up whenever you can, and hope that things would change in time.
Yeah.
Christy.
Sorry.
Oh.
Go on.
No, go ahead. No, you go on, please.
I was just going to follow that up with, I don't think that comes from a place of malice. I think it's complete oversight, and you're right. We need to make a lot more noise about it and say, actually, have you thought about this? Because the chances are they haven't. So yeah, I think I think it's difficult. Females aren't socialized to do that. From a very young age, we're not socialized to do that. We're socialized to people please. And standing up and saying something is the complete opposite of people pleasing. It's making a fuss. But yeah, we have to start making a fuss, because like you say, you can't do an all-day interview like that if you're nursing. It just doesn't work. Sorry, go on. I just wanted to put that in there.
No, I'm just curious with Christy, because I know that, she, has moved up at Liberty here, recently, and principal status is definitely, that's an admirable place to be. And so I'm just curious what your journey has been like there. Like, what kinds of, what have you experienced?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of in the same boat with a lot of the hiring process just in general. And, full transparency, when I applied to Liberty Mutual in the intern program, they didn't even have a tech interview, and I loved it. Like, it was kind of like, what are you familiar with? Can you tell me about a project you've worked with? Like, it didn't feel like, I think, Eleanor, you brought up like gatekeeping in a way. Like, I loved that. And I think that we should do more of that. I was actually kind of upset a couple years ago when they did start including a tech interview process. And, I was pretty involved in like picking the questions and like making sure we're not harping on those things, so that we are making it available for everyone to apply and to feel comfortable applying and to get through the interview process without it being such a headache. And I have in the past like applied to places like Google and Amazon as well too. And actually, I even had an experience where I was flown out for an interview in like a kind of data engineering position with Amazon, and they told me like, wow, no, you're way more into the software engineering. And I think I told them like several times, I'm like, if you send me that interview, I will not pass it. Like, don't send me the programming thing, because like this is going to end there. And they're like, no, you'll be fine, and I spend all this time studying, and like sure enough, it's like the first hurdle, like failed it. They're like, oh, sorry. And it's completely automated. You're not working with you at the time. I wasn't working with the person one-on-one. It was like, hey, we're going to send you this. You have an hour to do it. No resources, like kind of good luck. And there's no like help with that. There's no transparency or anything. So the interview process is definitely something that I am highly involved in at Liberty Mutual. And like, I really like the emphasis more on seeing your problem solving skills and like kind of helping people go through it and working with them, instead of like, hey, do this, and you have an hour to do this exam. If you don't pass it, we're not going to talk to you after that. Like, I think that really, and it takes away that diversity aspect too. So I think that's an issue too. But on the promotion front, that's a little bit different. I think that I've definitely thrilled to have the principal title, but it also at the same time feels kind of like a breath of like, well, finally, like, it's kind of months of people telling you that you're somewhere, and you're supposed to be this, or that you should be, or that your peers are there. And it almost feels like a fight sometimes, which is definitely really difficult. And I think that kind of happens everywhere to an extent. But, I've been really lucky, and I'm a pretty loud person. So I definitely push and advocate for myself day in and day out. And I keep a list of all the things I'm doing, and I keep track of all the events, and things like this definitely help too. I mean, I think that we should put a higher emphasis on things like speaking, things like blogging, things like what you're doing to promote diversity and women in tech, because I think those are all important aspects and part of our job as well. It's not just coding every day. It's doing all these other aspects and facets that I think go into that and make you a well-rounded engineer or somebody well-rounded in technology.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think like joining things like this, I help to organize like global serverless days, because then I can start stepping into place like, what are we doing to make sure that these conferences are having diverse speakers? Why are we seeing, some with 1 to 12, like doesn't make sense, so then you can start to put some policies and things into place so those things don't happen. But again, it does take work and time that all of us don't have, right? And it's honestly, I'm not saying it should, like, I'm not saying, yeah, it shouldn't be on us, but unfortunately it is. And it's, like the way to get things to close is by pushing forward and forcing it, and, finding people that you could trust, doing a lot of research to make sure you're going on the right team and that you trust the manager or that you trust the company. I know, Eleanor, you talked about that. You're really interviewing them too, because, you're going to have to push. So you're going to need somebody that has your back.
It's interesting you mentioned service days. That was, I think that was the first time that we met. So as well as the user group, we sort of organise a service days event over in Cardiff. And I think the thing that struck me was that it's run as a sort of not-for-profit. There's a goal in terms of trying to support disadvantaged or underrepresented groups in technology. So we were giving away 25% of tickets, but we just couldn't find groups to give them away to. We just couldn't do that. So I guess the question I'm really interested in is like, sort of my position in terms of involved in meetups and conferences and so on, like what should I, I recognize the problem, I just don't know what could I do or what should I be doing, because I'm obviously very aware of this sort of unconscious bias or something that I could be guilty of myself. So is there any recommendations for what other people could be doing to provide a platform and to provide support?
I think in the past when I've tried to bring up a concern to a manager or a leader, I run into cases where I was not believed or I was told that this was my perception, and that is like an instant signal for me to leave that team and move on to something else. Because if I'm not believed, it's going to be it's going to make life really hard for me, right? And I think for me, if there's anything, I think we should really stop gaslighting women and try to hear them out, see what their concern is, because there's a way to fix it without the people involved having to leave.
I was just going to come in on that, the gaslighting side of things, and particularly the ramifications that can have on people in the industry, right? A friend of mine joined one of the organizations I was working for as a graduate developer and kept raising issues and was never believed, exactly like you're saying. And, she wasn't getting heard. And she's ended up moving jobs like at least once a year in the time she's been in the industry, and moving from initially starting out in a developer role to a more user-focused role where she is believed when she starts saying things, and she's moved to an organization where she is finally believed. And the trajectory of her career has been in part affected by not being believed. So when we talk about how do we make sure there's a community that we can reach out to, it starts exactly like Pranita is saying, with believing people when they're raising these issues and not driving them out in the first place. And then on top of that, we've got to make sure that I think we're building those connections and building that network, like we've talked about a few times, right? In South Wales, my experience so far running my own meetup, when I started Cardiff Go, I actually wanted to start a Women Who Go chapter because I was really anxious to find a community of women I could speak to about technical things. And I couldn't find anyone else at the time in South Wales who was a woman working in Go full time. And I had to kind of settle for starting the generic Go meetup in the hopes that like women would come out of the woodwork and I'd find them. So I do think like South Wales community is particularly small and maybe lacks diversity, but that means we just have to all work that much harder to build the right channels and reach out to people and invite people into that space.
I think, Eleanor, you're hitting on like a big topic too of just exposure is an issue. Like that's a huge gap that I'm seeing. You know, as somebody who went through academia, they're not teaching, like, you know, in my space, I'm cloud and serverless. They're not teaching those things. Like you kind of learn a language and then you learn like data structures, algorithms, and those things, but you're not going beyond that. So there's not much exposure in terms of like, hey, like you can go into security, you can go into cloud, you can go into DevOps, you can learn about Go, you can learn about Ruby, you can learn about Python. Like there's not too many of those paths. And even now, like I'm seeing a lot of diversity come out of boot camps and things. But those are really focused on like full stack and learning like a web framework, and that's it. And then I go to things like this and people reach out to me afterwards and say, wow, that's so cool. Like I've never heard of, you know, going into cloud like this way or doing DevOps or things like that. So I think that there is just a huge issue in the sense of like, how do we bring these ideals to people in academia, to people in boot camps, to people who are retooling? Like, how do we get all the options kind of out in front of people and say like, hey, you know, the women in tech pie is growing a little bit, but you kind of divvy it up into these smaller groups and there's problems. So it's how do we get that in front of people? And I think that that's a question I've been thinking a lot on and don't really have an answer to yet.
I think that's the challenge, where it's the tech industry moves faster than academia can certify courses. And that's the challenge that we sort of saw, which is one of those questions for me in terms of, you know, I think there was someone mentioned earlier in terms of how fast tech evolves. And, you know, I was listening back to, it was actually a networking talk from reInvent, and they were saying when they launched AWS, you had one VPC, and they didn't believe that any customer would ever require more than one VPC. And it was, you know, everything was just so simple. And now it's, you know, there's thousands of new features get released every year. So there is a, you know, I'm assuming it can feel, you know, overwhelming, and, you know, I think imposter syndrome is very real for lots of people. So if you are, you know, for someone who is starting relatively new into public cloud, would you have any recommendations in terms of, you know, I heard, you know, a number of people talk about things like IoT devices and little building projects, things like that. Are there any recommendations you'd have for what people could do to get started?
I was thinking about this a little bit earlier, right? Because when I was looking back at how I got started in the industry, I thought that to get started as a developer, I needed to know a programming language. And it wasn't until I started working with developers that I understood that I needed to know how to use the command line, and I needed to know how to use Git and all of this like contextual stuff. And for me, when I look back at learning the cloud, doing, say, like going through a YouTube series that explains an AWS concept, it's almost like, what are the prerequisites for that? What are the things you need to know before even some of those courses make sense? So I think there's a basic grounding in some concepts around sort of servers, virtual machines, containerization, and software processes, that being able to kind of know that little vocabulary helps a lot in my understanding of a lot of the courses that I then consume. I'm still trying to get myself to a position where I can take an AWS networking qualification, because networking is really not my strong suit. And even going through that course, there'll be a bit on like, and then you need to set an IP range, and they just throw a bunch of numbers at you and expect you to know how IPs are designed. And I have to go, whoa, hang on a minute, is this something people know about? Like, no, I've got to go and do another course first, right? So there's almost these prerequisites and fundamentals that I think sometimes we skip over when we talk about getting started in the cloud, that I think can be really helpful.
Yeah, there was a really great resource that was thrown my way the other day, and I think the URL is learntocloud.guide. So learn to TO cloud.guide, all one word, and it basically it covers what you mentioned, Eleanor. It says, you know, depending on you know, if you don't know anything, you should start here. You should get comfortable with Linux command line and networking basics, and then if you follow through the sort of online workshops, then you can start right from zero and work your way up, and all those sort of prerequisites are covered. I thought that was really nice for somebody who, say, you know, maybe they're graduating this year, and because academia is quite theoretical, they might not necessarily have had exposure to this stuff, and this is the stuff you need in the day-to-day job, right? So yeah, it's a great resource. Go and check it out. Learn to Cloud. Yeah, learntocloud.guide.
I just wanted to jump in. I'm someone who learns as I'm building things. I don't do great with courses. I can't sit and follow through. So if that's you as well, then I would recommend taking a look at your current work, your current application that you have. If you're already in tech but not in serverless, this is for you. What I started with was just taking a simple part of my design, like I think it was an API call that did a certain transformation, and I moved that to serverless just as a proof of concept. And it showed me just how incredible it is in terms of, like, you don't have that much operational challenges anymore. You don't have to patch your operating system, etc. So I would start with just in your work, taking a small piece of your architecture and moving that to serverless. If that's the way to start.
I guess the other question I had, like Eleanor touched on, South Wales is a pretty small community at the moment. And I know a number of people talk about the value of mentorship. So if you're in a fairly small community, is there any advice you would give in terms of how you would go about finding a mentor?
I mean, I would start with the AWS heroes and the AWS hero groups, because that's what they're there for, right? Is they're there to assist. I mean, there's Andrew Brown with ExamPro. He has a ton of free content. In fact, he just acquired some other company in order to, help to be able to create even more free content. And he does have a whole network that he's been building as well for mentorship for these types of things. I think if, joining some of these user groups and, I think you kind of got to feel people out too and see if you're going to trust them. So I think a lot of it is getting to know somebody. How do they communicate, right? Is this somebody that you're going to want to pair program with? So, I think it does take, attending some events and kind of getting to know somebody before you could decide really if you want them to be.
Cool, thank you.
But I have a quick, I wanted to come back to you had, you talked about things that you could do, to, maybe attract more diversity at, some of these events and maybe into the user groups. And I think there's like very intentional things that you could do, is starting making sure that there's a COC. I think starting off user groups, making sure that it's called out there, like very clearly, like what will happen, if abuse happens, and then make sure that you're moderating to ensure that if it does happen, they don't have to be the ones to say something, that you step in and handle it right away, or that there's a team that actually does that, because, it's hard to keep up on comments that could be happening 24/7 in any sort of group. But those do have to be moderated very closely, because, one comment can turn into a big spiral, and, once it's out there, it's out there. So I definitely think having a COC and a very, very, and a very clear and one that makes people feel comfortable. I think, intentionally looking for women speakers. There's a lot of people out there that are doing a lot of things, and, providing them a platform. But again, a lot of these folks, I don't think, are going to put up their hands sometimes, because maybe they don't feel like they're going to get picked, or maybe they've been turned down because their name isn't the one that's known. or, maybe they don't feel like they're the most well-versed. I know the only reason that I got to go to some of these events, these certain like service events is because, your team and through the AWS Hero program, we were able to get help going to some of these conferences, but my company was going to pay for it. So, finding ways to sponsor the travel, or, help fund those types of things. I've also seen a conference that had daycare. And it was a day, event, and they had daycare, and they sent out a survey before and asked how many were going to be needed, and found the appropriate space to have that. I think those types of things where you see you're being thought of, or that, they've thought bigger than, a typical event. Other things are, having a diverse types of food and making sure it's not just alcohol, and that there are special drinks that aren't just coffee and water, for the folks that don't want to drink, and maybe not even soda. Maybe find, fun. I always found like fun. Yeah, I don't know what all they were, but like they're like fruity root beers or the orange cola. I found all kinds of different things, got some really good teas, but, making sure that, you're just kind of thinking bigger than what the standard would be. I think all those types of things helps people to feel comfortable. But those would be a few things off the top of my head.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, I would second that. I think there's a huge issue of identification sometimes with user groups or collectives. It's if you can't see that this is a group for folk just like me, you're not going to go, you're not going to join in. So yeah, definitely featuring women guests if you're particularly after women, so that women can think, well, she's just like me, I identify with that. It's an issue of identification. And going back to the refreshments comment, one issue I have in South Wales meetups, this is pre-COVID when people used to physically meet up, it would always be free pizza and beer. Now to me, that's the language of a man cave. So what message is that sending? Just once in a while, maybe we could have tea and cake. To me, pizza and beer says this is a very masculine event for people who identify with that. And yeah, I just thought I'd put that in there.
Okay, thank you. Then we move on to, I think, what is likely to be the last question, which is just, I think it's more just a general, I think Farah touched on it. So even today, people still believe that, people still see in terms of, whether it's down to salary or career progression, is this still a very real thing that affects everyone?
Definitely. I work in the civil service now, and the way pay happens is a little bit more regulated. But in one of my previous roles, there was a point in time where salaries were being renegotiated for everyone. My manager was about to leave, and he took me aside and he said, all of the men are about to be paid this much money. If they try and offer you a penny less, tell them I told you. And this is not long before companies in the UK were being required to publish their gender pay gap stats, right? So he's just like, I'm giving you all of the leverage you need to like actually stand up for yourself, right? Because if he hadn't been there, I wouldn't have known that. It was like a fairly chunky gap. So I'm real grateful to him for pointing it out. But companies still get away with a lot under the cover of, isn't it rude to talk about money? And like actually just being open about it would be so much better for people who are underrepresented and people who are underpaid and undervalued.
I'm sorry, go on.
I just wanted to say that, again, your manager does not want to pay you lesser than the men in the team. This is something I've come to learn. This is not intentional. But I think what has helped me is to befriend like a woman who is at a higher level than I am in the company, to understand how I can make my case better, to use the terminology that then my manager can use with his manager to or their manager to make my case on, this is why this person should be paid because of these reasons. And sometimes it just takes the right words. And sometimes it just also takes knowing what your level is and what your the each level is capped at a certain point, and how and where you fall in that compared to other people in the same level. So so this also goes back to the mentorship question. You need to find a mentor who is, who you can relate to and is at a higher level than you in the company and understands the internals better than you.
Well, thank you.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I'm a big fan of the Norwegian model where everybody files self-assessment tax returns, and these are publicly readable for 12 months after filing. So there is no darkness, there is no hiding. You know what your neighbor is earning, you know what your school teacher's earning. Everybody knows everybody's business, basically. So they can't get away with any of that shenanigans.
I think I saw something on the actual International Women's Day itself with there was like a tweet bot. So whenever a company published something, there was a bot that replied with what their gender equality balance was in terms of pay. And then because you can delete something on Twitter, but there's still always going to be a record of it, there was then a list of all these companies that then tried to delete their social media tweets, which is like, it was just fascinating.
One of my favorite things about that, so I love the bot, and I think the bot is what makes that data really accessible, but that is government open data at its finest, right? Like, that is why I do what I do, because I want to make that kind of information that the government has available as open and as accessible for people to come up with these creative ways of highlighting injustices. Because like, without open data, we wouldn't get that, but without people invested in Twitter bots, we wouldn't get it either. So it's like a real interesting relationship we can have with government information.
Yeah, I'd say something interesting with that for the US right now is Colorado is actually the first state that has passed this, where they have to show what the salary range is for the job postings that they have. So one thing I found interesting in this remote world is that there are some job listings that are saying we'll be remote everywhere but Colorado, because they know they have to post the pay gap and the salary range for it. So that's kind of like a red flag for me now of like, oh, okay, I probably don't want to work for you because you're clearly doing something a little shady where you don't want to release what your salary ranges are. So I found that really interesting, but it does drive me nuts that the pay is such a taboo topic. I remember that going through college and at fairs and stuff, you can't ask that. Like, you can ask about benefits and time off and everything else, but that's still a huge part of the job that you want to ask about, and a benefit and something that you need. So I'm liking that there's more of a push these days for transparency in that. I'm seeing more people come out and share and post TikToks and silly videos and stuff that's just like, hey, this is what I'm making, because they're not going to tell you, and that's not cool. Like, it's still a big part of why you're going to accept a job.
Farah, I can see that you want to come in. Can I just say one quick thing on the topic of that transparency around hiring practices, right? So I mentioned that I'm really into like inclusive hiring business. One of the biggest lessons that I try and teach people when I give these talks is that by the time you're negotiating something with a company, you've gone through their sifting, you've gone through their interviews, they've invested thousands of dollars or pounds in the idea of hiring you. So you asking for a little bit more money, or you asking for an amount of money that you think feels a little bit risky, the worst thing they're going to do is say no and come back to you with their original offer. They're not going to take your offer off the table. And if they do, they are like a 1 in a million, not very nice company. So the worst thing you can do is for yourself is to not try. Like, you have to push yourself even when it feels uncomfortable. The other thing is, like, women on average undervalue their skills and themselves by at least 10%. So whatever you think you should be asking for, add at least 10%, if not 20 or 30 to it. Because by the time they negotiate you back down, you still need to be valuing yourself at that like 10% higher. There's another thing that I often say when I'm going through contract negotiations, that every dollar you don't pay me today, I will have to work twice as hard to earn that at my next job. like the next time I negotiate this, my negotiation is always harder than a man's, because people just don't think I'm going to be worth as much money because of all of these systemic and unconscious bias problems. So I try and use that if a manager seems receptive. Like if they need, I think Pranita, you mentioned earlier, making sure you've got that language available, right? One of the arguments I use is that by not paying me more today, you're disadvantaging me for the rest of my life, not just while I work for you. So there's a couple of different like mindset shifts that we almost have to get ourselves in when we get to that negotiating table to really push for ourselves in ways that a lot of people don't, but it can really pay off.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Thank you.
Yeah, I really like that. And also know that you can negotiate other things. So it's not salary, then it's time. So, you know, one of the jobs that I had, I negotiated Fridays off all summer long. You know, that was what was going to work for me. And then I kept it, you know, I worked half days on Fridays. So there's different things when the startup didn't have, you know, the funding they said they wanted to give. When I, you know, wanted to raise, you know, I talked to them about different things, and, you know, it ended up being Fridays. So, you know, there's other things that you can negotiate. And I do agree. Yes, always, 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 always ask for more. I will never forget the first time that I was told to ask. It was like $40,000 more than I made. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I'm going to feel silly saying that. And they're like, you have to do it. And I'm like, I mean, I literally had to like work myself up. And I'm like, okay. Oh, like, and like I was like sweating, just felt all weird, like I was doing something wrong. Which, why was I thinking I was doing something wrong? I asked, and I think it came in like $5,000 less. So I mean, at the end of the day, it's a win. It feels really, really weird and uncomfortable, and I don't think it's gotten better with practice. It still feels really weird, and I wish it could make it feel better. But anyhow, yes, very, very good point. Also, thank you for with the open data. We appreciate you.
Thanks.
Yeah, so now I'm, you know, I'm conscious that we're up on time. So, I mean, I have to say, for all of the user group events that we've run, this one has just flown by. It's, you know, the challenges you've all faced, it's been sort of eye-opening, it's been enlightening, and sort of inspiring to listen to. So a huge thank you to Farah, to Christy, to Sharon, to Pranita, to Eleanor. You know, it's been a privilege to sit here and listen to it. So thank you also to everyone that's watched. Please get in contact, continue the conversation, stay safe, and hopefully we'll all meet up soon. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.